Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Midnight Hatter Live, the weekly variety show where we talk Gunpla, gaming, and Gundam. I am Steven, aka Midnight Hatter, your host. Joining me, as always, is the Blue Gamer Gundam explainer, Adam Blue. And in third chair, we have a special guest joining us, world traveler, uh, two-time GBWC local champion, and avid collector and enthusiast of retro gaming, Ellie of Pixxellie, Pixxellie's World. Welcome to the show. How are you tonight?
Hello. I'm great. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat about all things Gundam and retro games. That's pretty much my jam, so it's a perfect fit.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we were just saying, like, before we started was this is kind of like a match made in heaven because obviously Adam is a huge retro gaming enthusiast and he had been following you prior to when we started seeing some of your Gunpla builds, and so it was like, wow, this is
Funny.
fantastic.
Yeah.
This we definitely need to have you on. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
So obviously, links down in the description. I'm sure that you guys are already following Pixxellie on Instagram, X, Twitter, and YouTube. But if not, links down in the description to go check out the content. But tell us about how you got into Gundam and Gunpla in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. It was kind of just like random. I randomly picked up some model kits way back in the day when they were at Toys R Us, and I wasn't actually familiar at that time. Actually, maybe I was familiar, but I didn't watch Gundam Wing on Toonami or anything. Like I knew it was there, but I wasn't drawn to it. Um, but I saw the toys, and I remember thinking like the box was very large for the price compared to other toys in the store, so I bought a couple of them, and I didn't even know that they were model kits. I found out later that they were model kits, but I happened to be, I grew up in like an artistic kind of family. My grandfather paints, my mom did artistic stuff. So I was really excited that it had, oh, you're supposed to paint it and all of this stuff. So, um, yeah, I just thought they were really cool. I tried to paint them. I did a really bad job. And then I didn't really think much about Gunpla for many, many years until I stumbled upon a little shop in Chinatown in New York City that was selling randomly a bunch of vintage kits at the time. I didn't even, I was so out of the orbit of like new Gunpla stuff. I just saw them
Yeah.
and it was very apparent that they were like from the 80s and 90s. And I love that stuff. So I bought a couple of them and then, yeah, just slowly started getting back into it kind of on and off, starting probably about 10 years ago, but more uh, seriously, more heavily, I'd say like since COVID times.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. Do you remember what that first kit was from Toys R Us?
There were a couple that I bought. I had the no grade Death Scythe with a 1144, the wing, and I got the Bolt Gundam. And then I also got two 1100s, the Master Gundam and the God Gundam. And that was it.
Nice.
I don't remember if I got them all at once or if I was excited and I went back and got some more, but it was those 5.
Oh, and
Yeah.
and that Death Scythe had those terrible chrome stickers and, like, oh, man.
Yeah.
I
It
think
was
my first no grade wing kit, I ended up it was it was or yeah, so, like, I had built the Endless Waltz ones, but then the first, like, 1/144th scale wing kit I got was a Wing Zero that I colored with Sharpies, which obviously, like
yeah, I painted the wing with craft paints, and I got really upset. I remember being at my it's funny, I don't remember a lot from those years, but I remember this vividly. I was in the back room at my grandma's house, and I painted it with craft paints, and I remember just being absolutely horrified with how bad it looked, and I, like, wanted to cry. I might have cried and told my mom because I thought I ruined it because it just looked so bad, and I kept looking at the manual shots and then my kit and, like, not I was confused at the disconnect of to why mine looked so bad and
it's like
the
that
one in the
Homer
manual.
Simpson meme, like, "Why doesn't mine look like that?"
Yeah,
Uh,
but, uh
Oh.
but yeah, I figured it out eventually. decades
Yeah,
later.
I would say so. I think that you've nailed the whole painting thing for sure. And I
Yeah.
love that you came by it honestly, like, the fact that your family's very creative and paints as well. It's like it's such a cool legacy of, just kind of carrying on that tradition, but putting your own spin on it is a very, very awesome thing, I think.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
And so I also like that you know, you just mentioned that you had picked up a couple of like vintage kits in Chinatown, and honestly, I feel like that's one of the reasons that we're kind of kindred spirits is that love of vintage and older kits. Where do you think that that comes from? Do you think that like it's just an old soul, or like is there something about the vintage kits and retro video games for that matter? Is like what is it
Yeah,
about the old that appeals to you?
I don't know what it is. I think about this quite a lot because it's definitely not I don't know if it's nostalgia. To me, it feels like it's not nostalgia because a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in is actually before my time. So, like, things from the '80s, for example, I really love '80s kits. I love the '80s box art. I love video games from the '80s. I also love anime from the '80s, something about that whole aesthetic I'm just really
Yeah.
drawn to, but I didn't
100%.
experience any of that when it was first coming out. So it's hard for me to say it's nostalgia, but I don't
Well,
feel the same way about things from, like, the '50s. So I don't know
oh,
if it's
yeah.
just that the '80s were a specifically magical time. Um, I
There
think
is something
part
to that, right? Like,
yeah, there's
Well,
something
everybody
to the
kinda has an '80s
this is that
crush.
thing, and I brought it up to you before, Steven. I've learned it recently after Christmas, where like Christmas is this vibe, and you surround yourself with that stuff, and there's certain sights and sounds you associate with it, and it makes you happy. And then I think that's just what happens with this, because for me, also, I didn't get into Gundam until late in my life, and then I feel like there's this nostalgia for it. And how is that? No, it's that vibe I didn't know I was into, which is 80s anime stuff and like seeing, designs that are really badass. They don't normally I didn't normally see American cartoons growing up. So yeah, and the music is a big deal too. It's like that with the video games. Like it's the vibe, it's the pixel graphics with the music. And then like later in life, I got into metal and I realized, wait a minute, it's because a lot of that older Japanese music was kind of like in video games was like metal.
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
like Rockman
Yeah, and
or
so it's
Mega
a
Man.
vibe, yeah, vibe thing for sure, I think.
yeah, I mean, I think there's potentially a nostalgic element also because a lot of the anime that came to the States that we were watching in the early 2000s or late '90s was stuff that was a bit older just because there
Yeah.
was such a big lag time back
Oh,
then, so
yeah,
potentially there's a little bit of that, but I do think there's a lot of stuff that I just find very interesting, and even, like, First Gundam, which is from the late '70s, something just the whole thing, the way that the, voice recording sound, it sounds, like, warm and fuzzy and analog, and it's
yep.
not crystal clear. Um,
I
yeah, I
love
don't
the
know, it's just a
tone,
great vibe.
The
like
stingers,
yeah,
when it
all
would go to
those
the commercial breaks, just hearing that.
it's
Yeah,
so
I
good.
remember one time I just decided to watch Zeta Gundam, and then, my wife was next to me, she's like, "Oh, what is this?" Because 'Cause she'd heard it before in the background of me watching it, and it has that feeling, that warm, welcoming feeling.
Well, I always say, you know how they say that there's, like, a German word for everything? Well, there is, in fact, a word to describe that nostalgia is I believe it's pronounced anemoia, where it's
Oh,
nostalgia for something that you haven't experienced.
Oh,
Um
that's so interesting.
So,
yeah,
but I to your point, I don't think that that accurately describes the specificity of the way that you're talking about it, where it's like, it's not that you're nostalgic for anything that you haven't experienced. It's like it's a very specific time frame, it's a very specific mood, it's a very specific genre that is appealing. So that's a but the thing is I feel like it's such a common phenomena. Like all three of us have the bug, right?
yeah.
Yeah, it is pretty common. It's yeah, it's interesting, but I
Yeah, and
don't
it's like when I get into other things, like right now I'm on a little Godzilla kick where I'll watch the Godzilla movies, buy a figure, play the video game, listen to the music, and it's just like a vibe I'll carry, for a few weeks until I move on. Whereas Gundam's always that background consistent vibe, I think. that I have, yeah, vibe.
Um, So, when did you decide that you wanted to kind of take your artistic expression in Gunpla and make it a competitive endeavor? I don't think that that's something we've ever asked someone before.
Mm,
Um, that's a great question.
yeah.
I think hmm, so I was gonna say I think a lot of it is actually moving to Virginia and making a lot of friends at, a local build night and then hearing about competitions from them. Before that, I had never really considered it. I did enter one really, really small, Discord Gundam competition, um, where I didn't win, and I was a little disappointed, um, prior to meeting those people, but I think a lot of it was um, just working on stuff and then meeting people, and they're like, "Oh, like, there's this thing called ODO, you should go to it. Oh, like, are you gonna do something for GBWC? You should. We all are." Um, and so I think it was just the community, drew me into the competitive part of it.
Yeah, there's definitely some peer pressure aspects of it. Um, but no, that's all. And so, like, you only recently came to Virginia, which again, this has been kind of a recurring theme since, like, I don't know, since July of last year on this show, where it's like I had only gone to the hobby town local to us when I discovered that the Bandai flagship store was there, and then found build night, and then saw that there was like the local model contest, and then I started talking to everybody from RBA Gunpla, and we've had Ricky on the show and Nick, and so I was like, man, this is incredible that there's such this vibrant and just extremely talented group of builders like right in this area. But yeah, you were just telling me that you're relatively new to the area. Did you come here directly when you had moved back from Japan?
No, so I lived in Japan just last year. I came here before moving to Japan. I was here for about a year. Then I went to Japan. I was here for like a year and a half. Then I went to Japan, and then I just came back in the summer, like the end of the summer. Um, but yeah, no, this is. I don't remember what the question was. Sorry.
Well, hey, real quick, was it when you went to decide to go to Japan? Was that something you planned for a while, or is it
Yeah, I had planned that for
okay?
several years, and it took me like 2 or 3 years to really get my finances in order and save up all the money because, I
Okay.
didn't work while I was in Japan. I was, like, just going to a Japanese language school and, um, kinda traveling around a little. I didn't really travel too much, but, yeah, I had to, save up a lot of money to
Yeah, I
pull that
bet.
one off. It was like a lifelong dream of mine. I wasn't able to study abroad in college, and you know, I feel like it was kinda now or never as
And is it like the culture, or is it like the video games and Gunpla specifically, or that one made you wanna go there?
Um, I don't know. I think ever since discovering anime, probably in high school, and just seeing those scenes of people living everyday life in Japan, I don't know, something about that whole
Vibe.
vibe was very fascinating to me. And then also, you know, being into retro games and all of that stuff, that's kind of icing on the cake.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's something I'd always wanted to do since high school. So it's a mix.
Yeah, 'cause it's cool. Yeah, because growing up loving video games, like, I've always known that aspect of Japan, but I never really got into anime until I got into Gundam, and I'm like, "Man, everything I like is influenced by Japan." So I'm always talking to my wife about, "Man, I wanna go visit Japan," and we'll watch, like, a documentary on it because it's like, yeah, it's like a playground for all the stuff I like. But, yeah, I would think just the cost, and then for the cost, you would think, "Well, I'd wanna be there for a while," and then it's like, "Well, then I'd have to plan that out." So
Yeah,
that's really
it
cool.
was yeah, it
Yeah.
was tricky to pull off, but yeah, exactly what you were saying, I think is totally true. I think throughout my life, just kind of realizing one thing by one thing, like everything I like is from Japan.
Yeah.
Like that's there's something really interesting about that, and
Yeah.
um,
And to
yeah,
your
kind
point,
of
even things that like people didn't realize were Japanese, because it's like growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was like, oh, I love Transformers and Power Rangers, and it's like, wait a second, this is anime and Sentai, like, these are the things that, so it's amazing the global influence that Japan has had on the culture. I lost that bid with my wife when we first got married to, like, "Oh, well, what are we gonna do for honeymoon?" And I was like, "Well, we could go to, like, Osaka, and, there's this, like" and then no, that didn't fly. So I'm
I'm
still
sorry.
campaigning for that one.
Have you ever been there?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you gotta go.
I know, it's like it's the pilgrimage, right? And that was the most recent video that you did, just covering, the top 5, shops in Tokyo, which, you also covered the one that's the hidden one that's just outside of Tokyo, which I loved, and I saw the shout out to the perfect grade Zeta Gundam that you featured in there, as well, because I was like, "Oh, that's my Grail kit." Um yeah, that it definitely got the travel bug in me going again, and so, like, one of my, I guess, toxic traits is that I watch tons of, like, Japanese food videos. I'm like, "Oh, man."
Ah,
Yeah. I mean, I think another thing too is I've always been really into YouTube since YouTube really first started in, like, 2006. I remember getting really into, The Angry Video Game Nerd, before it was a huge channel, and then, like,
Oh,
Happy
yeah.
Console Gamer and all of that stuff, and there was also, like, a very early generation of, like, Japan YouTubers, like J-vloggers, they were called at the time, and it was only, like, 5 or 6 people, which is crazy to think of,
wow.
like, now, and there's hundreds and hundreds of
Yeah.
people, and they're like, "I'm going to Japan, I live in Japan."
I know.
Um, and I think watching them just walk around and, like, the vending machines and all of that stuff when it was truly still very unknown to, like, 95% of
Yeah,
Americans.
the novelty of
Um,
it is like
yeah, and there's, like, this sense of discovery. It Yeah, it just all kind of felt magical back then. I'm sure it still does now if you're growing up and still discovering it, but, um,
yeah.
a lot of that stuff is so known now, but back then it was truly, like, new. Um, yeah.
So okay, so that brings up 2 really, really good questions, is, like, 1, you mentioned always kind of being into YouTube. When was the kind of light bulb in your mind that's like, "Oh, I really wanna create content around these things that I enjoy so much?"
I don't know. I mean, I had always kind of, because I like YouTube and I've followed, so many YouTubers for years, I had always been like, "Oh, yeah, I'll do a channel one day," and I think it was just COVID, um, like, many people just finally executed on things that they had kind of been, like, floating in the back of their
Some
heads for
people were
many
baking
years.
sourdough, you were making content, like,
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'll start a YouTube channel and figure it out."
that's awesome.
Yeah, it wasn't anything too crazy. It was just like, I have the time, no more excuses, let's just try putting something out." Um,
That's so cool, and I mean, you've been so wildly successful at it, so,
Thank you.
congratulations,
Yeah.
could please continue doing this because I enjoy watching your stuff.
Thank you.
Um, but then, yeah, so the other question I have from that is, you mentioned how, like, a lot of these things become known, and so the mystique around them is gone. Do you think that there is there, like, a critical mass that we might reach when it comes to content creation, and when it comes to, like, people sharing things online, where suddenly, like, just nothing is gonna be interesting because it's gonna be like, "Oh, I saw that on so and so's channel," or, "Oh, I've seen that before," like, do you think that it's gonna kind of rob people of the joy of experiencing those things, like, authentically?
Yeah, that's a really great question. That's another thing that honestly, I do think about, from time to time, and I think that that's the reason that people are starting to explore other things. I also think it's the reason that I'm a little bit more drawn to Gunpla, especially, like, vintage or, old school Gunpla these days. I think there are just less people covering it. Like, I can only really think of a handful of channels that cover old model kits on YouTube. Um, or maybe there's a larger number of channels, but they do it
Well,
kind of like one off. I'm talking about, like, seriously,
no,
this is the thing that
and
they
very few
document.
English speaking. Like,
Yeah, very few English speaking. Yeah, I have to watch a lot of channels in Japanese,
yeah,
to
and
see a
that's
lot
like
of that content.
I love watching, like, Japanese videos where they're taking, like, an old retro kit and, upgrading it, upscaling it.
Yeah, it's super cool. Um, but yeah, Hobby Clubhouse is a great one. He talks about the history of Gunpla, and that's a really interesting channel. And then there's some older YouTube channels where you can watch videos that are from like 15 years ago, but that doesn't really count. But yeah, that's kind of how I've been feeling lately. Kind of what you're saying. Like, I feel like I got into retro gaming before retro gaming was really a thing. I was listening to this show. I don't know if you remember the video game website One Up from like
Yeah. Oh,
way
yeah.
back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a show called The One Up Show,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they would randomly talk about retro games. I think one of the first ones they talked about that blew my mind that ended up being one of my favorite games of all time was Shenmue,
Oh,
and they were
Mm,
talking about it and how like ahead of its time it was and all of this. Um, and so I just started naturally getting into like retro games that way. But now everybody's into retro games. Retro games are so mainstream that the mystery of like, "Oh, did you know that, there was this on the Super Nintendo or this on the PlayStation," or like, what have you. For me anyway, a lot of that is kinda gone. Like, there's a bazillion people putting out, like, hidden gems, like the secret games for GameCube that you missed or something like that.
yeah.
Um, but when there's only, for those older systems, like 300 sometimes to like 1,000 on like a bigger system like PlayStation, like the number
mhm.
of games is finite. So
Oh, yeah.
eventually people are just gonna filter through it and then
Yeah.
that's it.
That's right. Yeah, that is
Um,
interesting.
Yeah,
yeah.
especially with, like, the proliferation of emulators and, like, now you don't even have to have the original hardware to do this stuff. It's like everyone's just emulating everything anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I had a huge, huge physical game collection that I had from ColecoVision up to whatever was modern for the longest time, and I would do what I'd call GameStop hopping, where I would just go to GameStops and just see. And the best time was, the early late '90s, early 2000s, where they were just trying to get rid of Genesis and Super Nintendo games, and I was like, that was right when I was living on my own, or in high school making my own money. So I'm like, oh, now I can buy these games so cheap. But I sold my entire collection because, like you brought up, Steven, the emulation. For
oh,
me, I
yeah.
was like, you know what? I was only wanting these games because I wanted to play them. There's like no other way I could play but now with emulation, or when companies re-release games, which I love that they get.
Right.
There's a game, that I just read about this morning. The Ninja 5 yeah, Ninja 5 getting released, and that's awesome. So, but so that's the interesting thing. So when I sold my video game collection, part of that was, one, yeah, I can access things in the emulators, but two, even looking on YouTube, it's like, okay, like, yeah, that mystique is almost like gone now. Like, it's almost like this isn't much of a treasure anymore because, like, something that I grew up with, that I had a connection with, I see it now everywhere. You can kind of feel the vibe just by going online.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, I love video game history. I've always been really fascinated about it ever since getting into, um, retro gaming or even just reading Nintendo Power growing up, and every once in a while, they would write an article about something from the past. But yeah, like what you were saying, like, um, yeah, there's a finite number of things, and there's so many people who have covered every single game. I think if you think about a channel like Did You Know Gaming or something like that, the
Yeah.
types of things that they have to cover now in their new videos, it's like they have squeezed everything out of all the fun facts, and now it's just like the most
Well,
crazy obscure,
and
the
and
obscure
then
fact about an obscure fact.
and then they don't even get, like, the views on that stuff. So it's like, at the end of the day, they're still chasing YouTube algorithm stuff.
Yeah,
So it's like, they can't not talk about Mario because, like, Mario's what's gonna get the clicks. If they were
yeah.
to talk about a game that no one's actually ever heard of, then because that's the other thing that I've noticed that's really, I don't know, it's disheartening because there aren't a lot of people that cover real hidden gems. Like, if I see one more YouTube thumbnail that's like, "Look at this hidden gem of Gundam gaming, it's 0079 Rise from the Ashes," and it's like, we all played Rise from the Ashes, like, cover one of the Gundam games that none of us played, like the PS1 Zeta Gundam game or something, like,
Yeah,
um,
for sure, for
it's like
sure.
it's kind of filled with posers at that point because at the end of the day, they're not really interested in finding a real hidden gem, they're more interested in getting a click, so it's kind of like it's good for retro gaming, but also bad in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I definitely hear what you're saying, and I do think that is a factor. I do think there are people that are really interested in getting views and getting clicks, but I also think for a lot of people who are maybe, like, newer to the hobby, I think a lot of these things are obscure to them, um, and not everybody has seen and played every game under the sun, right? So, like,
That's
if
true.
somebody is just getting into like Sega Saturn, they might be like, "Oh, this Nights into Dreams thing was like by the creator of Sonic. That's so crazy." But for anybody that's been into retro gaming, like that's the flagship game like for the Sega Saturn that everybody has talked about for decades.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I hear what
Or
you're
you're
saying.
boomers like Adam and I, and it's like, oh, man, the number of times that I rented nights because because my dad wouldn't buy us a Saturn.
Yeah, that's funny, yeah, 'cause, yeah, I would rent the Saturn, that was the one we didn't buy, but that it's funny, yeah, because with retro gaming, like, it's later on where, like, the Saturn's like, man, the Saturn has, like, some of the best, like, games on there. Like, there's even a Gundam game that only came out in Japan in '97, and it's a side scroller, it's like the peak of Genesis style graphics where they do the pre-rendering or whatever, but it's, like, of the original Gundam, but each stage, represents the story of the ori I love it like that, it's the narrative driven stuff, and never heard of it ever, and the only way I could play it was with an emulator, and it's like,
Yeah,
man,
that's the
it
best. Discovering stuff like that is the
yeah,
best. Which y- you know, going back to the original thing I was saying, and this has all just been a long segue for that, is the reason I've been really into Gundam lately is because for a lot of the older stuff, like you're saying in the English speaking world, like there are no YouTube videos about it. Like, or if there are, it's like one silent video of a person kind of, it's like 240p and they're like showing the kit, but they're not even talking from like
yeah,
12 years ago. There's
Yeah,
a lot of holes in terms of Gunpla and Gundam in general that are just not covered, completely unexplored, versus if I go to retro gaming, which is something I also love, like, every single game for every system, not every system, but, like, all the major ones has been covered.
yeah.
So, it's fun exploring something that hasn't been covered.
yeah, actually, that's why I made the Gundam Explain channel. I didn't think there was some general broad just Gundam channel, like, when I got into Gundam, I would see very specific, like, this person builds these this way and only Gunpla.
Yeah.
Or someone just maybe reviews anime in general, but not like, you know, diving into everything. Because I wanted to learn about it. I figure I'd, yeah, record myself reading it. So, yeah.
But no, that's great. I mean, like, honestly, that would be a piece of advice that I'm taking from you, is that if you're going to create content, find something that appeals to you, one, obviously, but that there's like a gap in knowledge for, because even from a preservationist standpoint, where it's like, some of these things might go away and just we'll never hear about them again. It's important for there to be some kind of visual record of, these kits existed at some point, or like this game existed at some point, because everything kind of has a shelf life, right?
Yeah. I think about that all the time because the only real resource for finding a lot of these old kits for me is Dalong.net, and I just think about, like,
Yes,
that
love the
site
long.
feels like it should not exist anymore. It's,
Yeah,
like, built on a framework from the '90s, and I just imagine all the time, like, I don't know who runs it. I think it might be a team of people, but it feels like it's one person, that's the vibe of it, but, like, if that person passes away or they decide to not do it anymore, like, and that site goes away, there's no equivalent of that. There's some wikis that kind of have kits, but
nothing
there's
that's
no
that
pictures.
thorough.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's nothing that's thorough. And there's a lot of stuff that's not even on Dalong.net. And that's when I get excited is when I find like this is an example of something where it's maybe not super obscure, but even on Dollar.net, I was researching all the mega size kits, and there's no record on there that there was a mega size of the, life size Gundam. So it's like a
Wait,
RX-78, there's a life like
like the
the one.
statue one? Yeah.
Yeah, 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 the one that was, in, uh, where is it? Yokosuka? No.
Was it the Tokyo one or like the Fukuoka?
Yokohama, Yokohama.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow,
it was the
that's
one from
actually, like,
Yokohama.
fairly recent.
Yeah, so there was a mega size of that, but it's not on Darling.net, and I randomly found it just, like, browsing eBay or something like that, and,
What?
yeah, there's just so many gaps, and that's not even something that's old.
No, I was
Right.
gonna say that one's actually, like, newer than, like, the Gundam Front Tokyo one or one of those ones, so, like, I can't believe I didn't know that that existed. But yeah, DeLong.net is a treasure trove of a resource. One of my one of our mutual supporters, Adam, it was our friend Goose, sent
Mhm.
me the Academy, full armor double Zeta, kit that I was like, or no, was no, that wasn't Goose. He sent me the Isaac. It was my friend Juby who sent me the full armor double Zeta. But yeah, both of them like Academy kits. So like not Bandai, didn't have the instruction manuals with them. So it was like, how am I going to build these things? I probably could have figured it out, but if you've ever watched me build a kit, you know that like I'm not great without instructions. Um, but yeah, so I found the instruction manuals in JPEGs scanned in on that site and printed them out and like built the kits. Oh, I see a Wolfpack in chat saying what's the site? It's DeLong.net. Let me I can actually type it in chat for you.
It's my favorite website.
Yeah.
Whenever
Um
I'm in a bad mood or I'm feeling, like, sad or I've spent too much time doom scrolling on social media, I just sit and I browse Darling.net and I'm instantly happy. Like, just discover like, let me look in this weird subcategory and see what exists and, like, look through the manual photos, and I just always have such a good time. It's such a good site.
oh yeah, it's fantastic. And I use it all the time for like research and stuff too.
It's great for
Um
research, like, you're thinking about kit bashing something or whatever.
yeah. Yeah, then I mean, like you said, I don't know if it's just one guy or if it's like a small team of people, but it is definitely like most Gundam things, it's built on a framework that's at least 20 years old and like held together with duct tape,
Yeah,
but man, there's gold in there.
yeah. For a while, I had wanted to create, like, an English version of it, but I just do not have the resources.
Yeah.
Well, I think that I think that A, that is a worthy endeavor. I think that B, to your point, if it ever goes down someday, I don't know if archive.org has a screenshot of the website, but I do think it's worth somebody, taking that data down and publishing it somewhere for future generations because for
Yeah,
some reason people are still able to find these older kits and things like that and like you said they've kept up with it. you know they have like everything that's recent.
yeah, it's pretty crazy.
um oh, Sammy. Sorry. So how do you find the kits that you kind of decide like this is something that I want to do something creative with versus something that you just kind of want to build? And because I think what was the most recent kit you built? Was it the God Gundam?
Um, there's a lot of kits that I snap build, but the most recent kit that I painted was the Rick-Dom 2. That was for GBWC.
Yes.
That I've done a bunch of
Green
snap
Knight.
builds. Right now I'm working on an entry grade, RX-78 for an upcoming video. Um,
Cool.
Cool.
but yeah, I did do the God Gundam. I really want to build that, the 160 scale HGX God Gundam. I really, really, really want to do like a full build on that. It's just going to take so much time, and just all my ideas are going to take so much time. So it's just a balancing act and trying to figure out which one to do. I guess that's not, that's exactly what you asked, right? Like, how do I pick which one to do?
Yeah.
It depends what I'm trying to achieve. So I can talk about the GBWC kit, the Rictom 2. I had wanted to build a kit from that series, the 0080 series. So I bought a couple of them and I snap built them, and just I took a look at the seam lines and how they were constructed, and I just sort of picked the one that seemed like it would give me the most, like, mileage in terms of it would look the best and the most modern with the least amount of work. Um, and I picked it for those reasons. I think I do that the same with pretty much anything now that I think about it, because that HGX, the 160 scale God Gundam, I'm really into, for whatever reason, those vintage 160 scale kits. Like, I built the Shining, I built the God Gundam, there's a Victory 2, um, and the Wing. And then also I just got the F91, which is a super weird kit. I'm gonna do a video on it.
Hmm.
It comes like half pre-built.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's very weird. It's like a half
Oh,
figure, but then it comes with a bunch of accessories on runners that you have to assemble. Um, but yeah, after looking at all of those kits, I felt like the God Gundam would look the best and look the most modern and require the least amount of work. I was also like the happiest with the sculpt and things like that. So I
yeah.
think it's yeah, I work on vintage kits, so I just try to pick what's gonna be like the least brutal.
Okay, yeah, so that's pretty
That's
interesting.
fair.
So that kind of reminds me of something. So like you're picking these kits that well, okay, let me ask, do you prefer the building or the painting and detailing?
Painting for sure.
Okay. And I
Yeah.
think that's what it is.
No
It's like
hesitation.
the you can look at like an older kit that's not as complicated in engineering, so you can get it put together and be able to hide. Yeah, that work would be easier so you can get to the painting and detailing. Because I feel the same way too, and we talk about it sometimes where it's like, building is cool, but I like the detailing part the most.
Yeah. And every once in a while, I think it's like I don't only work on old stuff, like somewhat recently I built the master grade Marasai, which at the time was the newest master grade I had built. I know it's not super new, but I was like looking at the way the pistons moved and the feet. I was like, this is so crazy. I'd never seen anything like this before. And I did get some joy out of the building, but I think once that novelty runs off, or wears off, I'm kinda like, "I just wanna paint this thing."
Yeah, now
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, so that's why I'm a huge fan of the RE100 series and the
Oh,
Full Mechanics series, because it's
Love it.
kind of like master grade-ish detail, but you don't have to build all the crap inside that nobody's ever gonna see.
yeah.
Thank you.
That's exactly what Steven was saying when I forget what show it was recently. Yeah, because that's a good point. That's really another good reason why it's weird, I guess. Not a good reason, it's weird that they got rid of that line, or don't do
Well,
more. I would think just in general, what if there's a way to do that where it's like a entry grade, but 1/100 scale,
big.
like
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been thinking about this recently, like, my, like, fantasy line of Gunpla kits that doesn't exist would be, like, perfect grade surface detail and, like, surface gimmicks maybe, but just the simplest construction that you can build it in, like, an hour.
yeah,
Like, that's my fantasy line, and actually,
Yeah.
there's a similar, kind of a similar concept. It's not really, it's kinda different, but there's, I saw it at the Shizuoka Hobby Show. I can't remember the name of the line, but I think it's called model art. They're called model art kits instead of model kits, and they don't articulate, so they're kinda more like a resin kit in that way, but
Oh,
they
that's very
look fantastic. Like, they
yeah.
look incredible, and it's all about you can build this real quick, so it's all about painting, and I
that
think it would be so cool if Gundam did that. But I guess
Yeah.
it's easier to do that with figures, but with Gundam, there's so many, like, layers and stuff. You get into a tricky world where you have to do a crazy amount of masking, so you definitely need, like, separate parts.
yeah,
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that would be like, fantasy line would be, like,
that makes
amazing
sense.
amazing detail, super simple construction.
Yeah,
Well,
I feel like
someone on
that's something they could do. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say someone only recently brought up to me that, like, Kotobukiya kits are basically made with painting in mind, which, like, I've only built 2 Kotobukiya kits. It was a Zoids kit, the, Genobreaker, and the, Metal Gear Rex. Um, and both of them look fantastic, but man, there are so many superfluous parts that I'm just like, "You could have put this together on one piece," but, but now that I understand that, oh, it's because they're supposed to be separate so that you can paint them individually, I guess it makes sense, but I don't know. At the same time, it's like, well, that's kind of why I'm excited about, like, the Gundam Assemble, like, the mini
Yeah.
kits that are in that, is it's like, well, I just kinda wanna paint them like minis. I don't wanna have to airbrush and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm also super excited about those.
Oh, yeah. Do you think you'll play the game at all, or do you think you're more interested in just building and painting the figures?
Yeah, so I don't know how it's gonna go. I mean, when I saw the reveal, I was hyped about it, and I thought all of my friends from, like, the local build scene were gonna be super into it and, like, talking about it and, like, "Yeah, we can't wait to play the game," and nobody kinda cared. A lot of people didn't know. I was very surprised. I definitely have a few friends that are gonna, like, get them and paint them and, they
Okay.
buy all the latest Gundam kits. I just thought there would've been, like, more hype about
I'm
people,
I'm gonna
like,
show up, and I'm gonna make you all play with me because, like, I
I wanna
love
play it.
tabletop gaming, so
Yeah, I wanna play it. My fear is that the game is not gonna have a lot of depth. I don't know why. I just
Mhm.
kinda get that feeling based on the way it was presented. It looked kinda more like a standard dice board game than like a complex strategy game, but we'll see. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but
yeah.
I'm excited about the kits nonetheless.
I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's like that with the video games they come out with, there's really not much
They
depth.
don't have the best track record.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I hate to say that because it's like, maybe, yeah, they're making it accessible, but, like, a lot of times you don't wanna, what do you call that? It's like you're thinking that not playing the audience is dumb or something, maybe that's not the best way to put it, but it's like, that's why a lot of the Gundam games aren't like simulators like you think they
Yeah.
would be.
We all want the Gundam game that plays like Armored Core, but they just will not give it to us.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of, I call it a prestige game, something that the AAA Bandai Namco publishes AAA games. Why not make a AAA Gundam, you know?
Yeah, I really wish they would do I talk about it all the time, like, I would kill well, one thing I really miss, talking about going back to retro games,
Mhm.
is games that would release with, like, some kind of peripheral, so, like, a Virtual On for
Oh, yeah.
the Saturn had the twin sticks, and the Dreamcast version also had the twin sticks. There are also some Gundam games for the Saturn. I think I'm not sure about the Dreamcast that use those twin sticks, so the Gundam Side Story games, you can play with those.
Heck
And then
yeah.
there's Steel Battalion on the
I was
OG
waiting for you to
Xbox.
bring up Steel Battalion.
Yeah, and so I'm like, my fantasy would be a
Gotta
Gundam
have
like, a Bandai releases some crazy gimmicky controller that you play with, like, a VR helmet, and it's, like, this amazing immersive Gundam experience.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and
yeah,
and so as kind of a Star Wars fan, I feel like I'm getting out of it, but they had that Squadrons game that came out, and I got it on PlayStation with the PSVR, and I plugged in the joy and I was doing that whole thing, and it felt so good, and I'm like, "Yeah, we need this for Gundam. Where is
yeah.
it?" Like,
Like
in
a
that VR
slow
game.
paced you're
Yeah,
it's like a slow giant robot, or I
yeah,
guess if it's one of the newer series where the robots are fast and not slow, not
still
non-UC.
more of the
yeah.
tactical movements,
Yeah, I would love that.
Yeah.
I think, like, I was actually talking at, a build night to my friend about this. I was like, "I think it would blow up, like, people would freak out if they're like, 'They're releasing this Gundam controller, you can paint the Gundam controller,' or like, there's so many fun ways that they could do it. Um,
Do
I
you
don't
think
know.
that that could be, so to kind of bring it full circle, is like, do you think that a lot of the appeal about, like, retro kits and a lot of, like, the older Gundam media is that there's so much more passion behind it, and, y like Adam was saying, like, "Oh, it's just a Gundam game," like, I don't know if that's necessarily the mentality, but it does feel that way where it's like, with a game like Gundam Breaker 4, it's like, just put it out, like, Gundam fans will buy it, like, it doesn't really matter." There's, like, kind of a blasé attitude towards new Gundam products that you I just feel like late '80s, early '90s Gundam products, there was so much more passion and so much love for the media Do
Yeah,
you
I
think
mean,
that that might play a role in, like, what makes those things so special?
I think definitely, and I think that way about video games as well is so for both things, like Gunpla, model kits, and video games, in the early days, it was all independent. It was
Yeah,
all just nerds making it. Even if you think about a
Right.
company like Nintendo, so like the former president, uh, Iwata, like was a coder and like game programmer and game designer that went on to be the CEO of the company. And if you look at other companies like who's the, CEO of Xbox or something like that, that's not who those people are anymore. And I think it's the
Right.
same thing with Bandai. Bandai's interesting where a lot of the people at the top actually did start out in, like, the garage kit scene, and they were really involved in, like, Hobby Japan and things like that, um, and other people in the model kit industry too, like, it's still run mostly by modelers, but there's definitely more of a corporate influence, especially with Bandai versus, like, I don't know, like Max Factory or something where it definitely feels like what they're doing has a ton of passion behind it still, um but yeah, I do think everything used to be just, like, nerds making it because they loved it, and now it's definitely, like, corporations making stuff to make money, which is why I think indie games are so interesting. Like, I think indie games
Yeah.
now are doing what, like, regular video games did in the '80s and '90s.
oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
and a lot of these bigger publishers, like Microsoft, Sony, they're wondering why their games are failing, and it's just because they bought the studio doesn't mean they bought that creative lead, and that has been this problem this whole time. Like the Hi-Fi Rush studio, once Shinji Mikami left, Microsoft's like, well, we don't need the studio anymore. We really
Yeah.
wanted that guy. He was, when you don't have that visionary, that's where and so that's why indie games tend to be very successful, is because a visionary is directing it.
Well, and all the publishers are consolidating on, like, Unreal Engine 5, whereas,
Yeah.
I've watched enough documentaries about, like, uh, Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey, and, like, Crash Bandicoot and, GoldenEye, where it was like GoldenEye was made by, like, 9 people, and, half of them weren't even coders. It was like, "Hey, I'm an art student in England, and I just went and took a picture of a bunch of guns, and they told me to model the guns for GoldenEye. Like, I don't know what I'm doing." But somehow they made it work, and they fit on a 64 megabyte cartridge, whereas nowadays, it kind of feels like because people are working without limitations, there's no constraints, and so there's no creativity. And so
That's a great point, and I think the constraints for me are one of the most interesting thing about vintage model kits. And also one thing I
Yeah.
wanna say quick on that
absolutely.
point because 'cause you're talking about GoldenEye is one thing I like to remind people as well is Pokemon was an indie game made by a group of people that ran a fanzine. Like, Game Freak was a fanzine before they were a game developer, and now Pokemon is probably, like, the most like, the one of the
And
perfect
now they're
examples
suing
of
fans.
we just kinda spit stuff out to make money.
Yeah.
They sue people that make fan games based on their content.
Yeah,
It's like
Yes.
it's crazy how
bad karma.
Yeah.
mhm, you live
Yeah,
long enough to see yourself become the villain.
yeah. But so to go back to Gunpla though,
Yeah,
with working on vintage kits, there's so many limitations. It makes it really interesting. And one thing I often say that's like really fun when you go back and look at old issues of Hobby Japan or Model Graphics or Dengeki Hobby or whatever is the really, really old kits. They're very rough around the edges. They don't look as, clean or high fidelity or perfect at all as newer kits with newer techniques. But they all look so unique and they all have so much soul. And if you go and look at those old no grade kits when like the pro modelers would do them back in the day, like two different modelers or three different modelers, the kit, they have to look so different because they require so much work, like so much puttying, reshaping, like rescribing. Like the kit by design will have your personal stamp on it. There's no way to do like just a clean build. And I think that's really fascinating about vintage kits, like, the clean build doesn't really
True.
exist of a vintage kit.
yeah. No, absolutely. And I love seeing what people can make of them, and in a lot of ways, like you said, there's certain things about it that make it easier to work with, and obviously certain things that make it more difficult. Like, removing seam lines to me seems so much easier when I'm working on a vintage kit compared to, working on a modern kit. And then, finding different areas to paint and things like that. And surprisingly, I found that, a lot of no grade kits, like some of the UC kits that I have, in particular, like, the Char's Zaku 2 has like a cockpit modeled on it, and like and it's something you would never really even see if you unless you took the chest plate off. But like, the modern, like the HG Revive Zaku doesn't have that. The Origin Zaku doesn't have that. So it's fascinating to see the level of detail that's poured into older kits that you'll never really see or appreciate in favor of something like articulation, which I think really what it comes down to is it's like newer kits have better articulation, but like sometimes the details nicer on vintage kits.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I with vintage kits, it's always case by case. So
Mhm. Yeah.
it's there's definitely like vintage kits where there's crazy seam lines running through a bunch of complex detail that is going to be like insane to remove. But there are a lot of them where I go back and I'm like, this is crazy. Like, wait, this is from this year? Like, this has more detail than this thing that came out in 2010.
I
Um,
know, wild.
yeah, it's really wild. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, that's like, I'm surprised that they haven't brought this back. Like, I guess technically they have in like certain real grade kits, but like the Zeta behind me is like the 91 Zeta that was like the system injection that had like the multicolored plastic in one runner, which,
That's cool.
I thought that was so cool to see. But like, you know,
It is super cool. Funny enough, the 160 scale F91 that I was talking about that comes half pre-built, that actually has a bunch of that system injection parts,
Hmm.
system injection parts. And I was actually really mad about it because I'm like, "No, I can't take this apart and do the separate colors, now I have to mask them." But they actually did it for instead of using decals or stickers, like the F and the 91 on the shoulders is
it's
system injected.
yes, they did that with the Gundam Mark II as well.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that, but so now I'm like, "Ah, now I have to, like,
I
putty it because there's, like, a little bit of a divot, and then I'm gonna have to figure out how to get new, like, water slides for it or something." It's cool if you're gonna snap build it. It looks really, really
yeah.
cool. But if you're gonna paint
Yeah.
it, it's a pain.
Sometimes I feel like you'll see a little bit of like plastic bleed over, and so you'll have like a little like part that needs to be like shaved off or something. I mean, it's just such a neat technology, like
It's a
just for
really
the
cool
novelty of it.
technology. Yeah.
Um, but
Mhm.
yeah, so it's I mean, so you definitely like build a kit and not necessarily because this is something that I've recently caught myself doing, and I don't know if this is the wrong way to go about things. So, I get an idea in my head where it's like, oh, I know that I want to take like the S Gundam booster unit from a retro kit and put it on like the modern Zeta Plus C1 and make a hummingbird out of it. But like that I came up with before I even built the kits. But it sounds to me like you snap build them and then find interesting ways to create with them as opposed to like going into it with an idea. Is that right?
I think it's a mix of both. I think there's definitely kits that I look at similar to how you're explaining it, where I've got this idea and I buy the kits and I wanna put them together. Um, but then there are other times where I snap build them and I let that process guide what I'm going to make going forward. Um, yeah, I think it's like a straight mix of both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then
And also I love doing that. What you I love
oh
combining, like, an accessory that comes with a vintage kit that the modern one maybe doesn't have, but you can take parts from the modern one, like, maybe
yeah.
the legs are better and you kinda mix and match and you make this, like, cross generation
Wow. Ultimate version.
custom version that has, different proportions and interesting stuff. I love doing that.
Yeah, it can be
It's so
really
much
fun.
fun. Yeah.
It's a lot of work, but so then like you said, you definitely come at it from more of an artist's perspective. But like as far as like the Gundam anime goes, are you are you definitely more of a UC person, or do you kind of appreciate all Gundam series? What was the Gundam anime appeal to you, if any?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. I don't know. I don't like to be negative or too critical often, but I do feel like a lot of Gundam anime is just not that good. But I love G Gundam, and I love some of the OVAs. Like I love Stardust Memory and 8th MS Team,
You
but a
mentioned
lot of
0080.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, War in the Pocket's great. Um, but a lot of Gundam I think is just very like mid. In in terms of if you're thinking about Gundam and we're not gonna treat Gundam with kid gloves because we love Gundam, but we're gonna put it on the same field as like
thank you.
amazing anime, like
Yeah,
Dragon Ball and Berserk and like just really like high level, like all-time great anime. I think like 90% of the time Gundam series really fall flat. Which to be fair is like it would be the same if you're talking about like the Pokemon anime, right? Like
yeah,
nobody is comparing the Pokemon anime to like other all-time great like Cowboy Bebop, right?
yeah,
They're not on
yeah.
the same playing field, but yeah, a lot of times Gundam is just like
Well,
slow and confusing and like
well,
I
I'm
don't know.
glad you say that because it's like, a lot of times, Adam and I will get criticized where it's like, "Well, you guys say you love Gundam so much, but you sure have a lot of negative things to say." And it's like, well, if
Yeah,
if
we
you
like
love
to
something, you really wanna see the best out of it, right?
Yeah. It's like with the video game discussion. It's like we're not trying to be, mean to Bandai. It's like here's, a critical way to think about it. And I think that's what we do pretty good when we talk about the Gundam series that we like or don't like. We normally avoid, talking negative if we don't have to, but it is kind of fun sometimes to bring up little aspects of things like how like when I watched the first Seed, it was just so overly dramatic. I couldn't take anything seriously. But it's like cool designs though. But
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every the thing you can say is like or I can say is pretty much every Gundam series has cool designs. Like,
yeah, yeah.
they always
Except
knock it
for
out of the park with the
Seat Wax.
designs.
This is terrible. I can't stand it. I hate it.
Really?
I'm also not the biggest fan, but it's grown on me a little bit, and I think if I do an alternate color scheme, I think it could be cool. Like, I'm imagining it in, like, a monochrome color. I don't know
Okay.
why. For whatever reason, when I look at it, it reminds me of those, like, firecracker ice pops from the '90s.
Yeah.
Oh,
Red,
yeah,
white,
that
and blue,
color.
like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
something about, like, the blue and white.
Yeah,
I
that
don't know.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a little too, like, I don't know, like, candy kinda
Yeah,
feeling.
almost the colors kind of reflect, I guess, the original intent of the colors of the RX-78 too, where using primary colors. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's like the mainline Gundams do that anyway, but in this particular instance, you're right, where it almost has this candy or toy look to it, maybe because of the
Super
curve
toy feel,
of
yeah.
it, and the colors, yeah, almost,
well, and,
uh
like, why does the red Gundam have 6 eyes? Like, it looks like a tarantula with
Yeah, it's an interesting design. I mean, the Evangelion fans seem to be pretty hyped on it, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I
Um,
just started watching Evangelion for the first time because, I've always heard of it and never, and it's interesting. And again, because I haven't watched too much different anime. It's usually like a few good ones from the 80s. But have you watched Evangelion?
I have not finished it, but I've watched it, yeah.
Okay. Because yeah,
yeah.
I don't know. Like, do you think that there's some vibe or thing that this new Gundam could have that's reflected from Eva? Because I don't know what it would be.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
'Cause
Yeah,
just thinking about typical Gundam stories, a conflict between 2 sides, and then thinking what would be the Eva angle, you know?
yeah,
That's
I don't think the Gundams are gonna be alive. Oh, that's a spoiler. Sorry,
No,
everybody.
no, that's the thing you always hear,
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think that's gonna happen.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know what
no,
it's gonna be.
that's the only thing, yeah, I could think of. Yeah. So I was curious to see what it's really gonna do. Just alternate UC is pretty cool. That's,
Yeah. I think that's cool. I always I always think when they take the time to do, like, a real thorough reimagining, I think that's fun. I think there's something fun about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely and maybe it's the cynic in me, it's like, would they have given anyone but Hideki Anno the chance to do an alternate UC? Or is it more of like a marketing tactic where it's like, "Well, if we can get these EVA fans to come out and and show their love for something."
Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
but,
like
Yeah.
the miniatures, the Gunpla, getting the miniature crowd, you know?
yeah,
Yeah. I do think I will say I think the reimaginings are a lot more interesting from what I've seen, um, than, like, the Zakus that are in Seed, for example, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Where that is like, but in this, they're at least actually trying something a little bit different. They, like, look like Zakus, but they don't.
right.
See, I loved that, like, G40, the 40th anniversary anime. It was like, that, like, I don't even remember. It was like 5, 10 minutes long, but, it almost like everyone was wearing, like, Victorian clothes, and they had, like, a really unique Zaku design. I was really sad that they only came out with the Gundam model kit because the Zakus in that little, promotional anime were so fantastic.
I don't think I've seen that.
Oh, man. Well, I'm definitely gonna send you a link to it then so that we can bask in all of its glory. Because it's like if Turn A was just,
Oh,
UC.
an extension of usage, yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we've been going for about an hour. Before we wrap up, I do wanna ask you, what is your favorite kit, past or present, that either maybe you've built it, maybe you haven't, maybe you own it, maybe you don't, but what is your favorite model kit of all time?
That's a crazy question. What does favorite mean?
I always think in my mind, at least today, what is my favorite? Always knowing that tomorrow it might be something
Yeah,
else.
it's
I mean, right now, my favorite is definitely that 160 scale God Gundam. I think for
Cool.
the time it was built, it looks insanely good, and it has really, um, unique and interesting elements on it, like, the shoulders don't look like any other God Gundam shoulders that have ever been put out, they just have a bunch of really interesting details. So that's the one I'm most excited about, like, today. Um, that's my answer for that, but, like, my other answer, I wanna say, is the witch kits that I've built so far are, like, crazy to me in terms of just I remember I painted one of them, the Frith,
Mhm.
and
it's a good one.
I was like, "It's like a master grade, but it's just a high grade." It's not like a real grade with the tiny parts, but everything is separated.
Mm.
There's no seam lines, like, I don't think maybe there was, like, one on the gun. Um, that kit blew my mind when I did it, so that was, like, my other favorite just in terms of engineering, but in terms of, like, current excitement, it's definitely the God Gundam.
Yeah,
Yeah,
understandable,
yeah.
for sure.
You don't
Well,
happen to, have interest in, like, those, Requiem for Vengeance model kits, do you? What do you think of those? Not your thing? I love them.
You love them?
Yeah, I love the design because it's kinda my thing. I love the whole, like, military UC, 1-year war stuff going on. Again, I come from, like in Star Wars, but I've kinda fallen out of that, and so I think that kinda.
it does look like a vintage Star Wars,
Yeah,
like, spaceship, like, it looks like Millennium Falcon, like, having little
all the little
little bits
parts
of
all over it.
greebles all
Yeah,
over it and stuff. I
fun
feel
to
like,
detail.
yeah.
I appreciate that they tried something different. I think some of them I actually think are better than others. I think I like the Zaku more than the Gundam. Um, but yeah, I appreciate I think I hope I'm not dragging this on too long, but I do say, like, pulling back and talking about how it feels, we were talking about how it feels like a lot of things are just kind of like cash grabs or like these big corporations are now just kind of like chucking out products. It is kind of refreshing that the most recent Gundam stuff that's come out, they've all kind of been big swings in terms of like the Witch from Mercury designs, like the Ariel is super different than anything that came before it.
Mhm.
Those Requiem for Vengeance designs are super different than anything that came before it,
Yeah.
and the G-Quacks, you could say the
Oh,
same
yeah.
thing. So, it's
It's
cool
true.
that they're at least doing that instead of
Yeah.
just
Swing for
It's
the
you could
good.
fences.
definitely say in the '90s, as much as I love those designs, like, the Gundam X designs were not very different from the G Gundam designs to the Gundam Wing designs. Like, it's all very much like, these are Gundams,
Right.
but,
Well,
yeah,
and
it's
those
cool to
were
see them
all
trying new stuff.
Okawara, right? It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
like, we
Yeah.
got Okawara back for Wing and then, and then brought him back again for Seed to like so it seems like every big wave of Gundam designs, they'll do some different things and then they bring back Okawara to rein it in and go back to basics.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. So, oh yeah, and of course, I think I asked you this privately, but I'm going to put you on the spot now because obviously, you and I will both be at least attending ODO. Are you planning on putting on anything on the table?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna bring something not to I mean, I'm gonna enter it, but not with the intention of, like, winning anything or being super competitive, but just, like,
No.
to bring something new that I haven't shown my friends. So, yeah, I'm gonna try to bring something small.
Nice. Well, I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to seeing that. But yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything that any parting thoughts that you wanted to share before we depart?
Um, I don't know. I don't have any big parting thoughts. The thing I like to say is just, when it comes to Gunpla, I like to just encourage people to do not what they think they should do, but what's fun. And, yeah, so, like, if you think like, a lot of times I say stuff like, "I think vintage kits are better," or obviously not, because I was just talking about how cool the Witch from Mercury kits are, but, um, I think ultimately it's just, like, whatever you think is fun and whatever you think is
Yeah,
cool is the way to do it, you know? If that's,
definitely.
like, Gundam markers or an airbrush or whatever, there's no right and wrong, but
As long
if
as it's
you're
not craft paints on a Toys R Us kit.
yeah, yeah, that didn't I mean, hey, I think now, today, I could figure out how to use craft paints, but back then it did not work.
Oh, yeah. Like I
Yeah.
said, I tried Sharpies, that was not the way to go, so, but
When
the
the
thing
Sharpies
is
turn, like, purple, when you
yeah,
it's,
as
like,
they get,
not
like
black anymore, it's just, like, purple.
it's terrible. It looks so bad. I'll post some pictures of it because I still have it. Well, no, that's good. Thank you so much, and thank you for hanging out with us this
Yeah,
evening.
this is
Oh, yeah.
fun.
This has been really, really great. So, and again, kind of a long time coming because obviously, we kind of travel in the same circles. So, I look forward to seeing you. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us in chat, and hope you all have a great evening, great rest of your week. Until next time, we will catch y'all later.
See y'all.
Bye.